So thank you for joining us this afternoon at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. My name is Samantha Hirsch. I'm the producer of public programming here at the museum. It's my pleasure to have you with us today. I'll tell you just a minute or two, and then I'm going to turn it over. So the Auschwitz Jewish Center in Oświęcim, Poland is operated by the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. It's just 2 miles from the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camps. The only Jewish presence in the vicinity of Auschwitz, the center opened its doors in September of 2000 so that people from around the world could gather to learn, to pray, and to remember the victims of the Holocaust. In this afternoon's special presentation, AJC's director, Tomasz Kuncewicz, how'd I do? Good. We'll share the center's critical work, we'll outline the ongoing efforts to preserve the Jewish heritage in Oświęcim, and to explore the importance of Holocaust education in present-day Poland. Before I turn it over, I just want to ask you to take a minute to silence your cell phones. And without any further ado, Tomasz.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to this presentation and discussion, I hope. I hope this will be an interactive event. And thanks to Michael Glickman, to Samantha and Rita for putting this together. Yes, so I will have my presentation first. I'll show some images, share some stories about the center, about the Jewish history of Oświęcim, and then I hope that we'll have some questions and some time for a discussion. So this was sort of mentioned at the introduction that the center opened in 2000. The initiative behind it was a man who passed away last year. It was Fred Schwartz, a New Yorker, who visited the town. He visited also the site of Auschwitz-Birkenau, probably like 25, 30 years ago. And he learned also that in the town next to Auschwitz, there was a significant Jewish presence, a significant Jewish community, and he thought that something should be done about this very much forgotten Jewish community. The Jewish community, which was kind of, whose history was overshadowed by the history of Auschwitz next door. So this was the kind of very beginning, and the idea really came from this one person, a New Yorker, who came to Auschwitz and to Oświęcim. And then after a few years, we opened the synagogue in the town, and I'll show some images in a moment. And this was really kind of the beginning of this place. So this year, in September, it will be the 18th birthday of the Auschwitz Jewish Center. I have here these 3 names. I'm sure the first name all of you know. The infamous Auschwitz, the German name for the town, but also, of course, the name of the site of the camp. Then we have Oświęcim, not a very well-known name. This is the Yiddish name for the town. So this is how the Jewish resident of Oświęcim called their hometown, Oświęcim. And then Oświęcim, this is the Polish name of the town, which was used before the war and is used today. One second. So we'll start with the synagogue. We have 3 historic buildings which are part of the center. So the first one is the synagogue, and right here we have a historic photograph of the synagogue and the square in front of it. Probably right before the outbreak of the war. So we have the building of the synagogue right here, and a well and some kids in front of it. Then we are moving to the time of what happened with the synagogue after the Holocaust, right? Before the Holocaust, of course, it was a synagogue, functioned until 1939. During the war, the Germans used it as a munitions warehouse. After the war, it was again a synagogue used by a group of survivors. Before the war, the Jewish community of Oświęcim had about 8,000 people. It was about 60% of the total population of the town. And this was one of several synagogues. So after the war, for a few years, it was used as a synagogue by this group of survivors, about 180 at its peak. Then most of these people gradually left the town, and the building was nationalized by the communist government. Poland at that time was communist after the war. And for some time, for about 20 years, it was used as a carpet store. And right here we have a photograph of the synagogue, of the building of the synagogue, used as a warehouse for carpets, some other materials, and so on. So this is the situation until around 1995. There was interest in getting this building back as part of the efforts of the foundation, which was run by Fred Schwartz. And it's a bit tricky with this mouse. Okay, and this is the condition of the synagogue today. After the renovation, after the recreation of most of it inside, because the building itself survived, but of course the interior was, first of all, entirely destroyed during the war, during the German occupation. Then after the war, it was the synagogue, but we don't know what happened with the furnishings. But when it was a carpet store, of course there was nothing that belonged to the synagogue. And this is the way it looks today, and this is how it looked when it was reopened in 2000. Most of the furnishings are a replica of the pre-war interior. There are a few original elements in the synagogue. There are plaques which are not very visible here, but there are two original plaques that survived from the pre-war times in Hebrew. There's a Shiviti plaque, and there's a plaque at the Mechitza for the Gabaim of the synagogue. So there are these two original elements that survived both the Nazi times and then time of the communism. And today the synagogue is used in a religious sense by visitors. There's no Jewish community in the town of Oświęcim now, but it's the synagogue in a close proximity to the site of Auschwitz. So of course it's visited by many Jewish groups, and some of them also use it as a place of prayer. And here just we have an example of such a group. This is a group from France with the chief rabbi of France, Chaim Korsia, reading the Torah. The synagogue is used as a place of prayer, but also as a place of different educational activities. It's a monument, so it's visited by various people, by Jews and non-Jews. We also have there sometimes concerts. Here we have an example of a concert by Matis Yahu. Some of you may know him. He's quite a famous American Jewish artist, singer, and he performed at the synagogue 2 years ago. In the same building of the synagogue, in the former women's section of the synagogue, now we have the museum, the Jewish museum devoted to the Jewish history of Auschwitzim. And we have the exhibit which presents this history chronologically, going back to the 16th century when the first Jewish settlers came to the town. Then we have the period of Galicia. So this was the time when this part of Poland belonged to Austria and then to Austria-Hungary. Then we have the interwar period, so the time between the two wars, 1918, so the end of the First World War, and then 1939, so when Poland is again independent. Then the Holocaust, post-war time in Oświęcim, and we'll have some images of the exhibit. So this is the former women's section of the synagogue. The name of the synagogue, actually something that I didn't mention, is Haberfeld Mishnayot, so the Association for the Study of Mishnah. This is the name that was used before the war, and this is the name which is still used. So this is this former women's section, which now has part of the exhibit devoted to the history of the Auschwitzin Jews. And we'll have, now we'll look at some of the artifacts from the exhibition, so it will allow you to get to know a bit our museum. Yes, this is a photograph from the interwar period, so the time between the two wars. And this is the Kadima Sports Club. And there's one young man, this is him, his name is Zygmunt Feiler, and he survived the Holocaust. He emigrated to Israel, and a few years ago we had a project called New Life. This was an exhibit about people who survived and who emigrated from Oświęcim to Israel. And he was actually the oldest survivor we interviewed, and this is him a few years ago. He was 100 years old. He passed away 2 years ago, but this is just a few words.
Nie wiem, jak się lepiej wyrazić. Czy ona w ogóle mnie nie wzrusza. Oświęcim jest miły. Pamiętaj.
I hope you were able to read the subtitles. Yes. No, it's hard to read. Ah, okay. Yeah, because of the light. Anyway, he says that Poland doesn't mean much to him, but Oświęcim, so his hometown, is a pleasant memory. Yes? And again here, of course, when we think about Oświęcim, and of course the association usually is that this is pretty much Auschwitz, it's a pretty surprising statement. Yes? I mean, he seems to be fond of this hometown, right? I mean, he does distinguish between Auschwitz and the town of Oświęcim. As part of the exhibit, we also have the artifacts from the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim. As I mentioned, the Jewish community was about 60% of the town, about 8,000 people. There were several synagogues, including the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim. And about 10 years ago, there was an archaeological dig at the site of the Great Synagogue, and several artifacts were found. And here we have, this is a photograph, this is actually a postcard, a pre-war postcard of the Great Synagogue of Oświęcim. So as you can see, this was quite an impressive building. It was destroyed at the beginning of the war by the Germans. Today there is just a little park. I'll say something more in a moment about it, about also our efforts to commemorate the site of this synagogue. But we also have in the exhibit some artifacts from these excavations. And like, for example, here we have the Ner Tamid from the Great Synagogue, which was found during the archaeological excavations. And there were about 300 artifacts found. that were, some of them were actually hidden in the ground, and some were just, parts of the synagogue that, when it was destroyed, they were in the ground. And these are pieces of marble, decorative marble with zodiac signs and Hebrew inscriptions. And exploring the exhibit further, we are moving to the part devoted to the Shoah in Oświęcim. So at that time, of course, it's called Auschwitz, because this is the German occupation, and this is the German name for the town. And the artifacts we have here, or the photographs we have here, and that I've selected for today, this is the photograph of the destruction of the Great Synagogue, right? We saw the artifacts, we saw the building as it was before the war, and this is the condition at the beginning of the war. First it was set on fire, and then it was demolished. Actually, it's not very visible here, but if you look very closely, there are a few men in camp uniforms working and demolishing this site. Yes, the ruins of the synagogue. And this artifact, this is a notebook that belonged to a Jewish boy, Henrik Enoch, and he attended secret classes in Oświęcim. This is from 1940, and his teacher was a Polish Catholic woman, Jadwiga Marciniak, and she gave him private lessons. This was forbidden to have classes. I mean, the Jewish children could not have classes, could not attend school during the war. But this boy had this teacher, and she gave him secret classes and of Polish, actually. And later on, he was taken to the ghetto. He died in the ghetto, and this is the only remnant that there is of this boy. These are the deportations. During the war, the whole idea about Oświęcim was that this should become like this ideal Nazi town. So there was no ghetto organized in Oświęcim or Auschwitz, but the Jews were deported from the town in 1941 to other cities in the kind of vicinity of the town, and this is a photograph of the deportations of the Jewish inhabitants of Oświęcim. This is part of the exhibit and devoted to the post-war times, and this attempt to revive a Jewish community in the town of Oświęcim. As I mentioned, before the war, there were about 8,000 Jews in the town. After the war, at the peak, it was 180 who came back, and there were a few Jewish families until the beginning of 1960s. And here we have one family, Elina Kuperman and Salomon Kuperman, her father. And we have a postcard, yes? This postcard was sent to Elina to Israel from Oświęcim in 1969. They emigrated to Israel in 1962 from Oświęcim, but the same teacher who gave lessons to this boy from the ghetto, who was killed in the ghetto, then was a teacher in post-war Oświęcim, and she was the teacher of Elina. And they stayed in touch until the teacher died, and she would send her birthday cards to Israel. And this is the card, sent to Elina to Israel by this teacher who, during the war, gave secret classes and then continued to be the teacher after the war in post-war Oświęcim. As part of the museum, we also have developed an app called Oświęcim, and it's an app that anybody can download for free, and you can explore more the museum, but also the Jewish heritage in the town. It's a guide to the Jewish history in the town, Jewish heritage in the town, and the museum. It's actually in 4 languages, and it's a very interesting tool of getting to know the Jewish history of Oświęcim. There are some interesting features. There are also testimonies of survivors. There's also augmented reality of 2 buildings: the Great Synagogue and the house, the house of the most prominent family in the town, the Haberfeld. So this is something that, for those of you who want to explore the history more or who are planning to visit Oświęcim, Auschwitz, Poland, this is something that I think is very useful. Outside in the square, we also have a piece of the exhibit. There's this installation. It's a triangle, and inside, if you look inside, there are graphic novels, and these are stories authentic stories from the history of the town. Most of them deal with Christian-Jewish relations in the town, and there are 7 such stories that we collected, that we learned about, and you can explore these stories in this installation outside the center in the square. There's also a book with these stories. The one that is right here, it's a story devoted to the Haberfeld family. This was the most prominent family in the town. They ran a liquor business, the biggest business in the town before the war. And this is about what happened with this family right before the war. They actually came to New York in August 1939 with their products for the World Fair, and their daughter stayed in Oświęcim. Of course, the war broke out, and they were not able to come back. In a moment, we're gonna listen to a testimony of Felicia Haberfeld, the wife of the last owner of the factory, and their daughter, Franciszka, with the grandmother, remained in occupied Poland, and eventually was killed at the Bełżec death camp.
My husband said, I am going because I have everything and everybody there. So no matter what, we are going. And sure enough, a small group of our people left. About 48 hours before we reached the port of Gdynia, we were watching a movie. One night was a movie, one night was a dance. That night was a movie with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. I remember vividly. The film was interrupted, and the purser came on the stage, and he asked to please be quiet and control yourself. He has something to announce. And the announcement said that our ship no longer is going to Poland, but has been taken by the British Admiralty, and we are heading toward someplace, he didn't know where. I don't think he knew where either. Well, what was happening there I'll never forget. Women were getting hysterical, screaming, crying. Men were fainting. It was something terrible. And I was sitting like a stone. I just couldn't move. there were a whole group of Polish priests and nuns traveling, and they all got on their hands and knees and they did first aid to those who fainted. And since that time on, our odyssey started. We never made it home.
So this was the testimony of Felicia Haberfeld coming from this World Fair in New York in August 1939. Now we are moving to our third building. So we have the synagogue, the building next to it, which houses the Jewish museum devoted to Oświęcim, and then we have the third historic building, which belonged to the family Kluger. This is the photograph of the family before the war. This boy right here, this is Szymon Kluger. And this family, most of the members of the family were killed during the Holocaust. There were 3 survivors. 3 of the children survived, including Szymon Kluger, Moshe Kluger, and Bronia Kluger. But Szymon Kluger, after some years in Sweden after the war, he decided to come back to Oświęcim. In 1961. So the time when most of these Jewish survivors or inhabitants already left Oświęcim, and he moved back into his family home, and he lived in this house until his death in 2000. This is the house about 5 years ago. This is the house after the renovation. And this house now houses a cafe, and it also is a place of various cultural and educational activities. The house was really a wreck, as you can see, the ones of you who can see, falling apart, but we managed to save it. We had actually a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter to collect funds for the rescue and the renovation and the adaptation of the house into a cafe and a space for different cultural events. So that's the house. This is the original door to the house, and we managed to save a few artifacts. The condition was so bad that it was not possible to save many pieces of the original interior, but the original entrance to the house we saved, and there's also a sign of the mezuzah next to on the right side, on the right door frame. And this is the interior today. It's a modern place. It's a place where visitors and locals meet and spend time. It's a very friendly, open place. And this is one of the events taking place in the house. This is a workshop for kids based on a novel by an Israeli author, Edgar Keret. This happened last weekend during the long night of the museums, which also takes place in Poland and also in Oświęcim. And I went through our buildings and what we have, kind of physical spaces, right? The synagogue, the museum, and the house, which now houses the cafe. But our major focus is education for different groups of people. Our kind of major focus is combining the history about the Holocaust, the history of the local Jewish community, about Auschwitz with contemporary diversity education. This is what we very much specialize in. Here we have an example of a workshop for kids during which they paint symbol coexist. There's a very famous symbol that was actually designed by a Polish graphic designer. You may have seen it somewhere. It consists of the symbols of the three religions, yes, of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And this is the workshop about this symbol, and the kids paint this symbol on T-shirts. This is an workshop for local high school students, and this is actually on the Holocaust Memorial Day, January 27th, that the student joined the campaign We Remember. This was a worldwide campaign organized by the World Jewish Congress, and these are the students who also have these pieces of paper with the hashtag We Remember. This is one of our participants of one of our international programs, Auschwitz Jewish Center Fellows. This is a program which we run every year. It's a 3 weeks long program, in-depth study of the Holocaust, Jewish heritage in Poland today, and the memory of the Jewish presence and the Holocaust in Poland today. So these are the participants from last year, and this is in Oświęcim. And actually, what's interesting, this is a mural with a quote by John Paul II. Anti-Semitism is a sin against God and humanity. This is a mural which exists in Oświęcim. Here we have a group of last year cadets and mids. This year's group is with us here today, and these are the cadets and mids from last year visiting our museum. We also run these sort of programs combining history of the Holocaust and awareness about hate crimes today for the law enforcement. And this is a group of the Polish police officers visiting the site of Auschwitz, and we run such programs for the Polish, German, and Icelandic law enforcement. And this is a group of Icelandic police officers in front of our synagogue in February. And we have a new project right now. This is a project about the commemoration of the site of the Great Synagogue. I mentioned this during the presentation, the artifacts from the Great Synagogue. So we have a crowdfunding campaign to fund a commemoration of the site. Today it's a little park with a modest sign, but we are planning a memorial park in this space. So this is the campaign that is in progress right now. So of course we very much welcome any assistance, any support, any donations to this crowdfunding campaign. This is again the picture of the synagogue before the war and actually the Jewish street which was there. This is the model of the synagogue from Oświęcim that is being presented as part of the Auschwitz exhibition. There's a traveling Auschwitz exhibition that is now in Madrid, in Spain, and as part of this exhibition, there's also a part devoted to the history of Oświęcim, and there's a model of the Great Synagogue. And this is the site of the Great Synagogue this April. So that's what it is today, but we are planning to develop it more in the near future. And now this is kind of the final short testimony from a woman, from a survivor from Oświęcim, again about her connection to the town.
Polska jest dla mnie nie tylko wspomnieniem. Jeżdżę często nie zapominam języka. Lubię Polaków jako ludzi. Dobrze mi jest tam. Oświęcim, Oświęcim, Oświęcim. To są wspomnienia dzieciństwa. Nie byliśmy bogaci, ale dobrze usytuowani stosunkowo na tamte czasy. I niczego mi nie brakło w domu. I dostawałam moc ciepła i miłości od rodziny, od wujostwa, od dziadka i babci. I to są takie wspomnienia, że często, gęsto spać nie można, bo ciągle żyje Oświęcimie. Nie wiem dlaczego. Mój mąż mnie zawsze pyta, nie możesz się odłączyć od Oświęcimia? Ja mówię, nie udaje mi się. Próbuję, ale nie udaje mi się. Kocham Oświęcim.
Yes, were you able to read the subtitles? No. Yes, well, the name of this woman is Rahel Jakimowski, and she says, again, she talks about the connection to Oświęcim, yes? She again really makes a distinction between, of course, Auschwitz and Oświęcim, and actually at the end, she says, I love Oświęcim, which kind of sounds a bit crazy maybe, yes? Because if we kind of translate it sort of into English, she would say, I love Auschwitz, but this is not what she means. She means her hometown and the attachment she had to her hometown and the life that she had there, despite the fact what happened with this place during the Holocaust and what kind of a symbol it is today. So, yes, this was the presentation. I welcome questions, comments, observations, anything that there is on your minds, please. Yes.
I'm sure when the Auschwitz Museum started, it brought a lot of confusion among especially Jewish people, thinking somehow it was related to the concentration camp. Given the current political climate, are you finding that Poland, Polish people don't like the fact that the museum is called the Auschwitz Museum and it should be more appropriately called the Oświęcim Museum?
Well, the opposite. I mean, you know, definitely today there's a strong emphasis to use the German name of the camp, not the Polish name, because yes, actually during communism, very often in Poland, the name Oświęcim was used, also by survivors, Jewish and non-Jewish. They used the name Oświęcim, meaning also the camp. But today there's definitely an effort made to distinguish and to use Auschwitz for the camp and Oświęcim for the town.
The museum has nothing to do with the camp, it has to do with life.
Our museum. Oh, right. It's our museum.
That's what I'm referring to.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yes. Well, that's right. I mean, actually, because in English, yes, in the English world, of course, nobody knows what Oświęcim is, yes? So this is the kind of reason that we use this name in English. For example, just to give you an example of how this functions, that when you are in Oświęcim and you use on your phone, you use the weather app, it very often says Auschwitz when you use English, yes? So it just shows that it's in some way in English, like the English name seems to be Auschwitz, also for the town, you know, which is not maybe good, but that's how it is used very often. Yes.
You showed a slide with the deportation of the Jews in the town. So I'm guessing that the camp itself had not yet been set up. You know what the timeline was? Like, when was the deportation? When was the camp open? I'm just wondering if some of the residents who were deported were probably sent back.
Yes, yes. Actually, the Jewish inhabitants of Oświęcim were deported in 1941 from Oświęcim to the ghettos in Będzin, Sosnowiec, Chrzanów. So these are the towns not far from Oświęcim, about an hour, 40-minute drive from the town. And most of these people were sent back to Auschwitz and killed at Auschwitz. Yes, this was the fate of these people. Mm-hmm.
Does the March of the Living go there?
To us. To us, yes? Yes, I mean, not all the groups, because, you know, most of these groups come on one day. So it's, for example, this year it was about 10,000 people at the same time. So, of course, we cannot accommodate all the people, but several groups come. So, you know, there are groups coming to us before the March of the Living, on the day of the March of the Living, and also after, if they come back to the site of Auschwitz, they come back. But it's the march itself, during the day of the march, just a few, you know, just a part of it, because we're not able to accommodate these numbers. Yes?
Where does funding for the museum come from? Is it all donations from around the world?
Mhm.
Is there Polish government funding as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, we are part of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We have a fundraising dinner here for the operations of the center, which actually is taking place tomorrow. So you're all invited. But there we also get grants, and also from Poland, yes, especially from the town of Oświęcim, and also from the region of the Oświęcim is in the region where Krakow is the capital. So we get grants for projects that we run. Yes, I mean from Poland, from other countries, from Germany. So yes, that's how this place is funded. But it's not a state, it's a foundation, so it's not a state organization. So we are also independent. So in this way, it's actually good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you maybe know something about the school curriculum, the history,
Mhm.
on the national level or local level, and if so, what does it say about
Mm-hmm.
this?
No, there's a Ministry of Education, which makes suggestions. There is some level of independence that the teachers can, you know, emphasize different things and can spend more time on this or on that. The Holocaust should be part of the history. The question is always how much of the war history is devoted to the Holocaust, how much of the war history is devoted to the you know, plight of the non-Jewish Poles. Of course, it very much, I think, depends on the mindset of a teacher, yes? Somebody who is more interested, more sensitive to the fate of the Jewish inhabitants of Poland and what happened to them during the Holocaust, definitely yes, commit more time to this part of the war. Others may spend not so much time on it. So it very much depends. I mean, I know teachers who are very involved in teaching their students about the Shoah, about anti-Semitism, about, you know, all the history of that time. But of course, I know also there are teachers who barely mention, yes, the subject. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The new Polish law outlawing the use of the term Polish
Mhm.
camps, has that affected your educational terms?
So far, it has not. It's you know, this law is right now in the Constitutional Court. It was sent to the court by the president of Poland. So it's very hard to say what the outcome of this will be. I predict that this law will be modified because there was a lot of criticism also in Poland. You know, the current government in Poland is a very, I would say, ethnocentric nationalist government. Yes, I mean, as you probably know, in many countries today, there's this trend, yes, of nationalism, ethnocentrism, and this is the situation we have currently in Poland. This is the kind of government we have in Poland today. So there was this was sort of to a great extent, a political gesture to the electorate, which wants to kind of glorify the history of Poland, yes, without discussing any negative parts of it. But Poland is very divided, very polarized, as the United States today. There's really a lot of analogies between America and Poland today. Mm-hmm.
In the testimonies that you showed, a lot of the survivors, or all the survivors, have good memories
Mhm.
of the town. Is that common across most survivors you've interacted with, or is it kind of a mix of how people feel?
These testimonies were filmed, I think, about 10 years ago. And the survivors we talked to, and they were the ones who wanted to talk about it, right? And they usually had good memories. Yes. Of course, it's always hard to say, right? They were children, so what they actually remember, it's like with our memory, yes. How much we remember from our childhood, right? It very much depends, what happened, what was important, and so on. But generally speaking, the ones we interviewed, had a lot of memories, a lot of stories about the life before and during the war. Mm-hmm. Yes.
How did you come to your position?
Sorry.
How did you come to your position?
To my position. Well, I'm Polish. I'm from Poland, but I was studying Jewish history at Brandeis, and I learned about this project. As I mentioned, the project which was initiated by Fred Schwartz, and I applied, and I was selected, and this was really kind of, after my studies. This was the sort of a natural development, and I decided to work on this project and develop it. So we started with the synagogue, but then came the museum, and then the house of the last Jewish resident, where the cafe is now. So yes, that's the situation. That's how it happened. Mm-hmm. Of Poland? A few thousand, I think. It very much depends on who you talk to. There are people who have a more optimistic view on this. My view is not as optimistic. So I would say a few thousand. But there are people who will tell you, people with some Jewish background, right? There may be 20,000, maybe 30,000. The chief rabbi of Poland gives a much higher number, for example. Yes. Mm-hmm.
How much research has been done prior to opening the museum on traces of survivors and where people ended up from this town?
This research continues. All the time we get information from survivors, from descendants of survivors. So we have several publications about the history of the town. We have these testimonies. Actually, we have testimonies of Jewish residents, but also of non-Jewish residents of Oświęcim, and also how they remember the life before the war and during the war. So we have, the research is not our major focus. We did research for the core exhibition, for the publications, but our major focus are these educational projects that we run, as I mentioned. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Mm-hmm.
How much is the factor of anti-Semitism that the right wing in Poland espouses affecting this particular town?
I don't think that this town is, affected more by the current situation than any other town. Anti-Semitism as a form of xenophobia is definitely part of this sort of, I would say, exclusivist approach, yes, in Poland or in this part of Europe, for sure. But actually, until this whole scandal with this bill, this was really not a big sort of issue. Yes, the relations between the current Polish government and the Israeli government were very close. But with the law, this really the crisis happened. But it's it's more about the question of how what Poland should be like the modern Poland, yes, after the fall of communism, democratic Poland, whether Poland should be inclusive or exclusive. This is the question. It's not so much about Jews. There are very few today in Poland, but it's about others. Historically, Poland was a very diverse country. Yes, one of the most diverse countries in Europe. About 30–40% of the Polish citizens were not ethnically Polish. This all ended with the war. There were Jews, Ukrainians, Russians, Germans. There were ethnic cleansings. There was a Holocaust. So this really led to a situation that for the first time in history, Poland is very homogeneous. But this is changing now. There is now, for example, it's estimated about 1 million Ukrainians live in Poland today who emigrated to Poland. Yes, there are other groups coming to Poland. So there's this sort of discussion and this sort of also divide within Poland today, whether Poland should be inclusive or exclusive.